Awaken your spirit. Chosen ones. Power doesn't panic in public, it panics in private. Most people think influence is built loudly. Titles, money, followers, visibility. That belief is comforting, because it suggests power is something you can chase, copy, or perform. The truth is less glamorous and far more unsettling. Real power is usually born in moments no one planned, no one recorded, and no one can undo. History quietly supports this. Many of the most influential alliances, favors, and lifelong obligations were not forged in boardrooms or on stages, but in accidents, missteps, and private moments where control briefly slipped. When structure cracks, hierarchy reveals itself. There is a strange rule that governs high-level players. They don't remember who impressed them, they remember who saw them, especially when that sight was never meant to exist. The world runs on carefully managed images, and the people at the top invest heavily in appearing untouchable. But every system has a margin of error, a delayed decision, a missed detail, a moment where things could have gone very differently. And when someone unrelated, unimportant, or uninvited becomes part of that moment, something irreversible happens. A silent thread forms. What makes this dynamic unsettling isn't heroism or kindness, it's imbalance. One side didn't plan to matter, and the other didn't plan to be seen. That's where the tension lives. The favor wasn't requested, the debt wasn't negotiated, and yet it exists, heavy, uncomfortable, and unresolved. And no amount of status can fully erase that. There's a quiet irony here too. The people who work the hardest to be noticed often get overlooked, while someone doing nothing special at the wrong time ends up unforgettable. That's not fate being poetic. That's power being lazy and reactive. It doesn't reward effort, it reacts to disruption. So when a moment like this happens, it doesn't announce itself. No dramatic music, no applause, just a subtle shift, a pause where there shouldn't be one. And later, a door opens that was never meant to have your name on it. Number 1. They now see you as a variable they failed to calculate. People at the top don't move through life casually. They plan, model outcomes, anticipate reactions, and reduce surprises as much as possible. Their sense of control comes from believing they've mapped the board. Every person has a role, every risk has a buffer, every outcome has a contingency. That belief is what allows them to operate calmly while everyone else reacts emotionally. So when you appear in their story without warning, it doesn't just surprise them, it unsettles them. You weren't supposed to matter. You weren't part of the structure, the network, or the long-term thinking. You didn't earn access by grinding, negotiating, or positioning. You arrived by accident, and that alone breaks a rule they rely on. Accidents are dangerous to people who depend on predictability. Not because accidents are hostile, but because they can't be controlled after the fact. You didn't follow the script, and now they can't rewrite it without acknowledging the mistake. What really sticks with them is that you didn't need power to affect power. You didn't have leverage, influence, or authority, yet your presence changed an outcome. That creates discomfort because it exposes a blind spot. If one unexpected variable slipped through, what else did they miss? That question lingers longer than gratitude ever could. This is why they keep you in mind, not emotionally, but mentally. You represent a flaw in a system they trust. They replay the moment quietly, not to thank you, but to understand how it happened. And because it already happened once, they can't treat you as irrelevant anymore. You've crossed from invisible to uncertain, and uncertainty commands attention. There's also something quietly humbling about it. Their position suggests superiority, but the event contradicts that story. You didn't outplay them. You simply existed at the wrong moment. That randomness bothers people who pride themselves on mastery. They don't know whether to minimize you or monitor you, so they do both. That's your real significance. Not the favor, not the debt, not the words exchanged afterward. It's the fact that in their mental framework, you are now marked as an unsolved variable. And power never forgets what it failed to predict. Number 2, your value comes from timing, not intention. In the world of power, it's not about why you act, it's about when you act. Timing isn't a bonus, it's the currency that decides influence. A single second can turn a casual encounter into an obligation, a quiet gesture into a lasting memory, or an overlooked person into someone they cannot ignore. The most successful players don't measure worth by effort or morality. They measure it by outcomes, and those outcomes are shaped entirely by moments. That's why your intervention, accidental or deliberate, holds a weight that intention alone could never achieve. Power respects results far more than reasons. Your intentions might have been pure, selfish, or chaotic, and it wouldn't matter. What matters is that the moment aligned with a crack in their armor. That alignment transforms you from a passive observer into a pivot point in their narrative. In high-level circles, timing is often the difference between being remembered and being invisible. One right move at the wrong moment is useless. One unexpected move at the perfect moment becomes unforgettable. When you saved them, it wasn't just a random act. It was a precise collision with opportunity. That single instant is now an invisible thread that ties them to you, whether they acknowledge it or not. They might try to rationalize it away, minimize it, or even rewrite the memory in their mind. But the truth is fixed. The moment exists, and it gave you leverage. And here's the ironic twist. You didn't need to strategize, plan, or manipulate. You didn't need to think about influence or obligation. You merely intersected with their timeline when it mattered most. That is the essence of value in power dynamics. Being in the right place at the right time outweighs everything else. Effort, skill, and reputation matter only if they coincide with opportunity. You didn't chase it, you didn't control it, yet your presence became a rare, unplanned advantage. That's why timing is lethal in its simplicity. It turns randomness into influence, accidents into debts, and ordinary people into unforgettable variables in someone else's story. And once that moment exists, your value is cemented, quietly but irreversibly. Number 3, you witnessed them at their most vulnerable state. Few things unnerve a power player more than being seen when they are stripped of control. Everyone cultivates an image, a mask of competence, composure, and authority. That image is their currency, their shield, and their weapon. When someone witnesses them outside of that carefully maintained projection, it creates a fissure in the reality they insist on living in. And you were that witness. You saw a side of them no one else was supposed to see, a side they actively hide, and that changes the rules entirely. Vulnerability in a high-level player is dangerous, not because it's human, but because it's rare. Their strength is largely narrative. It's the story everyone believes about them. By witnessing a moment where that story faltered, you became a keeper of a truth they cannot erase. That truth is now quietly negotiable. You don't need to demand anything because they already recognize, consciously or subconsciously, that you hold a fragment of power simply by remembering what they would prefer remained invisible. The impact isn't limited to the moment itself. Power players spend enormous energy controlling perception, managing threats, and calculating moves. Your presence at their weakest point is like a ripple in that control. They will replay it mentally, analyze it, and anticipate your potential. The memory lingers because it is proof that their infallibility is not absolute. You didn't force them to owe you anything. You simply existed at the intersection of their weakness and your action, and that alone reshaped the dynamic. Ironically, your accidental intervention elevated your significance far beyond the immediate act. By witnessing vulnerability and still acting, by being part of a moment they might have failed in, you created a silent contract. They owe you not out of gratitude, but because you hold an unspoken understanding of what they are willing to hide from the world. Moments like these are never forgotten. The stronger the person, the more they cling to appearances, and the more they remember who glimpsed the cracks. You now occupy a unique space, not an adversary, not a servant, but someone in possession of a truth they must respect, manage, and ultimately account for. You saw them when no one else could, and that visibility makes you quietly unforgettable. Number 4. They owe you not because of gratitude, but because of exposure. Power is rarely indebted out of kindness. High-level players operate on calculations, risks, and the constant maintenance of appearances. When someone saves them, it isn't the act itself that matters most. It's the fact that you were present when their vulnerability or failure was visible. Exposure is a currency more potent than money, influence, or charm. By being there, by witnessing a moment no one else was supposed to see, you became a keeper of a secret that can't be ignored or erased. That alone creates a debt heavier than any verbal promise. What makes this debt dangerous and valuable is that it isn't negotiable. They can't simply return a favor and call it even, because the weight of exposure is not something that can be balanced with gifts or gestures. You know something about them that they cannot unknow. You intersected with a private truth, and that intersection now silently demands acknowledgement. Every interaction afterward carries the shadow of that moment, and they are forced to account for it, even if subconsciously. High-level players are obsessed with control. The ability to manage perception is the foundation of their authority. When exposure occurs, especially unplanned exposure, it breaks the illusion of total command. They must respond to it, not out of gratitude, but out of necessity. Every decision they make around you will be influenced by the memory of that moment. Every concession, every careful conversation, every gesture of attention is shaped by the invisible weight you now carry. The irony is sharp. They may never admit you saved them. They may never even acknowledge it openly, yet the moment has anchored you firmly in their mental landscape. You are a variable they cannot ignore, a presence tied to a moment of exposure they must constantly navigate. That is why they owe you, not for your intentions or kindness, but for being the unplanned witness to a truth they would have preferred stayed hidden. And in power, exposure is more binding than obligation, more enduring than gratitude, and far more influential than anything they can give back. Number 5, you disrupted the natural order without asking permission. Power players operate in carefully constructed ecosystems. Every move, every relationship, every interaction is part of a larger, often invisible hierarchy. They expect compliance, predictability, and roles that reinforce the structure. When someone enters that system uninvited and alters an outcome, it creates a shockwave. You didn't climb the ladder, earn their approval, or ask for consent. You simply acted, and the ripple of that action disturbed a balance they assumed was untouchable. That disruption is both frightening and fascinating to them. What makes this disruption significant is its unpredictability. Power is built on control, and control depends on expectation. When you break that expectation, even accidentally, you demonstrate that the system is not as unbreakable as they believed. That moment of imbalance forces them to acknowledge you, whether subtly or overtly, because you now exist outside the normal channels of influence. You are no longer a background character. You are a variable that demands recalibration. Disruption without permission is especially potent because it carries no obligations. You didn't negotiate, maneuver, or seek approval. You simply intersected with their reality in a way that mattered. That makes your presence both unsettling and valuable. They cannot easily classify you as an ally, an enemy, or a tool, and that ambiguity keeps you in their thoughts. It creates a debt not rooted in etiquette or gratitude, but in necessity. The system now owes you attention because you exposed its fragility. There's also an invisible power in being outside the expected flow. People who follow the rules meticulously can be predicted, managed, and controlled. Those who act without invitation or notice are harder to contain. You demonstrated, without trying, that influence can exist beyond hierarchy. That alone changes how they approach you, talk about you, and even how they perceive their own strength. By disrupting the natural order, you didn't just intervene. You reshaped the framework around them, and power, even at its peak, respects those who can alter its path without asking for permission, because they reveal a truth the system itself cannot deny. No structure is untouchable, and no authority is absolute. Number 6. They can't punish you without admitting weakness. High-level players operate on the illusion of invulnerability. Every decision, every gesture, every interaction is measured to maintain the perception that they are untouchable. When someone unexpectedly saves them, that perception is quietly challenged. The act itself isn't a threat, it's the implication behind it. If they were to retaliate or punish you, they would be acknowledging, in effect, that they were ever in a position of weakness. And admitting weakness is the one thing they guard more fiercely than power itself. This is what gives you leverage without effort. You exist in a zone they cannot confront openly. Any action against you would betray the very story they insist on projecting. Retaliation would signal that they relied on someone outside their control to avert disaster, and that acknowledgement would ripple through their internal narrative and the perception of others. They are trapped by appearances, and your presence highlights that trap. It's a subtle, almost invisible form of security. You don't need to demand respect, negotiate terms, or manipulate outcomes. The mere fact that you were there at the critical moment and that they cannot erase it protects you. Their hands are tied not by law or ethics, but by optics. Every move they make must account for the risk of exposure, and the memory of their dependence on you is a ghost they cannot fully exercise. There's also a psychological tension that works in your favor. They will monitor you, weigh your actions, and anticipate your potential, all while carefully avoiding any overt move that could backfire. They owe you silently, not because of kindness or morality, but because power itself has made them beholden. The irony is clear. You hold influence over someone whose influence is vast, and yet the very magnitude of their position limits how they can respond to you. In essence, your protection comes from the invisible chains of their pride. They cannot punish, cannot erase, cannot diminish the moment you intersected with their vulnerability without shattering the narrative they've spent a lifetime crafting. And in that quiet imbalance, your significance grows stronger with every passing day. Number 7. You became a quiet liability. They must manage carefully. In the world of power, not every liability is obvious, loud, or threatening. Some are subtle, invisible, and profoundly uncomfortable. That's exactly what you became the moment you accidentally altered the course of events in their favor. You didn't walk into their life with an agenda or a demand. You simply existed at a critical juncture, and that existence shifted the balance in ways they cannot ignore. To a power player, this kind of unpredictable variable is far more dangerous than an outright opponent because it cannot be fully controlled or contained. Being a quiet liability doesn't mean they fear you openly. It means that every move they make now carries the weight of the memory of your action. They must calculate their interactions with you, weigh consequences, and anticipate outcomes that weren't part of their original plan. You are no longer just a person in their orbit. You are a factor that complicates every decision. They cannot dismiss you, because doing so would be ignoring a reality that proved consequential. They cannot elevate you fully either, because admitting your value too openly would broadcast a weakness they desperately want to mask. This is why they manage you with invisible caution. They watch, they test boundaries, and they measure your responses, all while maintaining the facade of normalcy. Your presence forces them into constant awareness. Every choice, every statement, every interaction is influenced by the possibility that you hold the memory of that critical moment and the ability to affect future outcomes. There is also a quiet power in this position. Unlike someone in the hierarchy who owes or serves them, your role is undefined, ambiguous, and unpredictable. That ambiguity keeps you significant without effort. They cannot categorize you as an ally, a tool, or an enemy, which means they must always account for you, even if only subconsciously. Being a quiet liability is a paradoxical gift. You are both powerless and powerful, irrelevant and essential. The very fact that you exist as a variable they cannot fully manage ensures that you are now permanently intertwined with their decisions, their perception, and their strategy. In the invisible calculus of power, that makes you unforgettable. Number 8. Your leverage exists even if you never use it. Leverage in power dynamics isn't about action. It's about potential. You don't need to strike, demand, or manipulate to hold influence. Simply existing as the person who changed a critical moment is enough. The act of saving someone, especially someone who wields power, creates an invisible thread. That thread doesn't need to be pulled for it to matter. Its weight is inherent. Every time they think, plan, or act, the memory of your intervention hangs quietly in the background, shaping decisions without a single word exchanged. What makes this kind of leverage extraordinary is that it operates silently. You could never use it, never bring it up, never remind them of what happened, and it would still shape their behavior. They now see you through the lens of possibility, the possibility that you could influence outcomes again, that you could expose truths, or that you could remind them, explicitly or implicitly, of the moment they were dependent on you. That uncertainty is more valuable than any visible action because it creates an ongoing obligation without confrontation. Power players instinctively recognize these invisible debts. They understand that someone who has the capacity to affect them in a crucial moment carries weight far beyond the size of the act itself, and the brilliance of this leverage is that it grows stronger with time. As they replay the moment, remember the reliance, and calculate what could have happened differently, your presence becomes increasingly significant. You don't need to assert yourself. Your significance asserts itself automatically. There's also a psychological edge here. The potential for influence forces them to consider your reactions, your opinions, and your future behavior in ways they wouldn't with someone entirely outside their orbit. They may treat you politely, strategically, or even deferentially, all without realizing the real reason. Your leverage exists not because of anything you actively did afterward, but because you already intersected with a point of vulnerability that cannot be erased. That is the quiet power of latent influence. You don't need to use it, yet it cannot be ignored. In high-stakes dynamics, being a living, unexploited variable often makes you far more formidable than those constantly shouting for attention. Your leverage is permanent, subtle, and deeply binding. Number 9. They will test you before they trust you. Power doesn't hand out trust lightly, and when someone saves a high-level player, the immediate response isn't gratitude, it's assessment. They will watch you closely, not because they are malicious, but because they need to understand what you are capable of, where your boundaries lie, and how unpredictable you might be. Every word you say, every action you take, every reaction you have becomes data for them to process. You are now in a zone where curiosity, caution, and calculation collide, and they will exploit all three to map your value and your limits. Testing is their way of protecting themselves. Trust is a rare commodity, and giving it without verification is reckless. Even though you already proved your worth by being in the right place at the right time, that doesn't automatically translate into long-term acceptance or influence. They need to know whether your usefulness was a one-time fluke, whether you can be counted on when stakes are high, and whether you might also be a liability. In doing this, they are not only assessing you, but also defending their own position, because every decision they make carries consequences that could ripple through their carefully maintained world. This testing isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's subtle, a casual remark designed to gauge your reaction. Sometimes it's deliberate, placing you in situations to see how you respond under pressure. And sometimes it is invisible, measured in the way they allocate attention, defer decisions, or adjust their tone around you. Each interaction becomes part of a quiet audit that shapes how they will engage with you moving forward. The brilliance of this dynamic is that it works in your favor, even if it feels uncomfortable. They are acknowledging, without admitting it, that you matter. Testing is a recognition of significance. It is the first step toward being integrated into a space few outsiders reach. The way you navigate these subtle probes will determine how far that access extends. In essence, the test is their acknowledgement that you are now part of a framework they cannot ignore. Your actions, your restraint, and your ability to navigate their scrutiny quietly define the boundaries of influence you now wield, long before they openly grant trust. Number 10. You now sit outside their usual hierarchy. Hierarchy is how power players organize their world. It's neat, predictable, and allows them to anticipate who matters, who can influence outcomes, and who can be ignored. Every person has a place, every role comes with expectations, and every interaction follows an invisible rulebook. When you save someone in that system unexpectedly, you bypass the ladder entirely. You don't climb, you don't negotiate, and you don't ask for access. You simply intersect with a critical moment, and that action propels you outside the usual framework. That alone makes you impossible to categorize, and that ambiguity gives you extraordinary power. Being outside the hierarchy means you are not bound by its rules, but neither can the person you saved treat you as an equal within it. You exist in a space that is undefined yet consequential. They can't promote you, assign you a role, or reduce you to a predictable function. At the same time, they cannot ignore you, because your presence now carries significance they cannot erase. You are both outside and indispensable, a paradox that keeps you constantly relevant. This position creates a subtle advantage. People inside the hierarchy are constrained by expectations, obligations, and the careful politics of rank. You are free from that, yet your actions affect the same system they navigate. You become a silent influencer, capable of altering outcomes simply by existing at the right intersection. Every move they make around you is tempered by awareness that you don't fit neatly into the order they control. The brilliance of being outside the hierarchy is that it forces them to account for you differently than anyone else. They cannot rely on standard strategies of control, flattery, or intimidation, because none of it fully applies. Your significance is derived from unpredictability, and that unpredictability demands attention and respect, whether they admit it or not. In essence, sitting outside the hierarchy gives you a rare kind of authority. You didn't earn a title, climb a ladder, or claim a position. You exist where rules don't fully reach, and that makes your presence unforgettable. In the quiet calculus of power, those who cannot be categorized often hold more influence than those who diligently follow the charted path. Number 11. They owe you because they hate owing anyone. High-level players are obsessed with control, image, and independence. Debt, even when it is invisible or unspoken, sits uncomfortably with them because it implies reliance, something they meticulously avoid. When you accidentally save someone like this, you introduce a problem they cannot erase. They don't feel gratitude in the way ordinary people do. What they feel is a subtle pressure, a recognition that they are now beholden to someone outside their careful calculations. And that pressure is far more binding than any formal agreement, because it strikes at their self-image. The irony is brutal. They don't owe you because they want to, or because your action deserves reward. They owe you because their pride and their obsession with independence make it intolerable to ignore your impact. Every decision they make moving forward will be influenced, even quietly, by the memory of your intervention. They may attempt to minimize it, rationalize it, or downplay it in front of others, but the truth is fixed. They are in your debt. And unlike ordinary people, this debt has teeth. It forces them to consider you in ways they might not consider anyone else. In meetings, in decisions, and even in how they present themselves publicly. This is why power dynamics are never straightforward. You didn't manipulate them or demand anything. You didn't negotiate access, build leverage, or perform for recognition. You simply acted at a critical moment, and that moment created a ripple that cannot be smoothed over. Their discomfort with owing anyone amplifies your value, turning what could have been a fleeting interaction into a permanent, silent obligation. The genius of this dynamic is that it flips the usual rules. You don't need to prove worth, chase influence, or assert dominance. The very nature of their pride and control makes your presence consequential. They will watch you, account for you, and in subtle ways cater to you, all without consciously admitting it. In a world where autonomy is prized above all else, the person they cannot repay becomes quietly, irresistibly powerful. And that person is you. Number 12. Your biggest advantage is that you didn't ask for anything. There is a strange power in silence, in restraint, and in the absence of expectation. When you saved someone who wields influence, you didn't bargain, negotiate, or demand acknowledgement. You didn't perform for recognition or try to turn the act into leverage. You simply acted, and that absence of request transformed the favor into something far more potent than ordinary repayment. In high-level dynamics, people who ask for attention or gratitude are predictable. They fit neatly into a hierarchy that can be managed, categorized, and ultimately controlled. You, by contrast, became a variable that cannot be contained. Not asking for anything immediately removes you from ordinary obligations. They cannot label you as an employee, a follower, or even an indebted friend. You exist outside their usual system of calculation, which makes you unpredictable and therefore valuable. Your significance is not tied to words, agreements, or contracts. It's tied to the memory of the moment, and that memory alone ensures influence. The lack of expectation forces them to treat you differently, because every interaction now carries the weight of possibility. You could ask, or you could remain silent, and either way, your position is secure. This absence of demand also forces them into introspection. They cannot reduce you to a transaction. They cannot claim, I gave, they owed. You didn't owe, and that denial of ordinary rules challenges the narrative they rely on to maintain control. They have to consider you on your own terms, and in doing so, they become subtly beholden. There's a quiet elegance in this strategy, whether intentional or accidental. By not asking for anything, you converted an ordinary act into a lasting advantage. You didn't need permission, recognition, or affirmation to create influence. Your restraint made your significance permanent. You are no longer just someone who acted at the right moment. You are now someone whose presence itself commands attention, respect, and subtle deference. In a world obsessed with obligation and repayment, your silence is your sharpest tool, and it ensures that you remain unforgettable. Number 13. They will remember you longer than those who served them. Service is transactional. People who work tirelessly to impress, to follow orders, to curry favor, are often forgotten the moment their usefulness ends. Power remembers results, yes, but it also remembers the unplanned, the uncontrollable, and the unexpected. That's why you, the person who acted without seeking reward and changed the outcome at a crucial moment, will linger in their memory far longer than anyone who served them obediently. You weren't a participant in the usual system. You were an anomaly, and anomalies stick. The reason is simple. Predictability is forgettable. People and actions that can be neatly categorized and anticipated rarely leave lasting impressions. But when someone operates outside the expected framework, when they intersect with a critical moment without fanfare or planning, they leave a mark. Your presence disrupted their narrative, introduced a variable they didn't account for, and altered outcomes they depended on. That kind of impact can't be filed away or replaced. You exist in their mind as a reference point, a moment they cannot ignore, a lesson in unpredictability they can neither erase nor replicate. This memory carries more than gratitude. It carries calculation. Every time they make a decision, assess risk, or evaluate relationships, the fact that you were there once, without pressure, without demand, without expectation, shapes their thinking. They remember not because they owe you a favor in the conventional sense, but because your intervention is a permanent wrinkle in their otherwise controlled world. It forces them to anticipate, adjust, and account for you in ways they don't need to with ordinary subordinates or supporters. There's a subtle elegance to this dynamic. You didn't compete for attention, you didn't perform for recognition, and yet your influence is more enduring than that of those who actively tried to impress. By simply existing at the right moment and acting in a way that mattered, you became unforgettable. Power doesn't reward effort alone. It records impact, and your presence has left a permanent imprint that cannot be ignored, replaced, or forgotten. Number 14. This is how invisible people enter powerful rooms. Powerful rooms, the ones where decisions shape industries, influence politics, or define fortunes, are rarely accessible to those without titles, connections, or visibility. Most people believe access comes from networking, climbing ladders, or proving themselves through long, calculated effort. But the truth is far more subtle and far more dangerous for those who think they're in control. Sometimes, invisible people enter these rooms not by design, but by accident, by timing, or by simply existing at the right critical moment. That moment, often unnoticed by the world, shifts the dynamics forever. Being invisible is paradoxically your advantage. Those who move quietly, without asking for permission or recognition, are unpredictable, and unpredictability cannot be easily managed. High-level players can calculate the influence of subordinates, allies, and rivals, but they cannot fully anticipate someone who appears suddenly in a moment that matters. By acting when no one expected it, by stepping into a gap they didn't even know existed, you create relevance that is impossible to ignore. Your presence becomes a variable in a system designed to eliminate variables, and that makes you inherently powerful. The brilliance of this kind of entrance is that it bypasses the usual gatekeepers. You don't wait for validation, approval, or opportunity. You intersect with critical outcomes, and the result forces acknowledgement. They may never say your name publicly, may never admit your role openly, but they will always account for you. You have entered a room where others sweat, strategize, and compete for recognition, and yet your presence is unearned, uncontested, and unforgettable. This is how influence often begins, not through effort, hierarchy, or visibility, but through unexpected relevance. The person who was invisible yesterday can become indispensable tomorrow, simply because they mattered when it counted. Power notices those who cannot be ignored, and being invisible is the perfect camouflage for someone who wants to exist at the edges of control, only to quietly reshape it. In the silent calculus of authority, those who appear unbidden often hold more sway than those who arrive announced. The truth is, influence isn't earned by titles, wealth, or relentless effort alone. Real power moves quietly, in the cracks, in the moments that no one planned, and in the intersections of timing, chance, and presence. By accidentally saving someone who wields power, you've done far more than perform a simple act of kindness or heroism. You've rewritten the rules of engagement. You became an unpredictable variable, a silent debt, a keeper of exposure, and a subtle force that cannot be ignored. You disrupted hierarchies without permission, created leverage without demand, and entered spaces that most people spend a lifetime trying to reach. Your significance exists not because of intention, but because timing, vulnerability, and opportunity aligned in your favor. What makes this truly extraordinary is the quiet permanence of it. Every interaction, every decision, and every calculation they make now carries the shadow of your influence. You are remembered longer than those who served them, respected without ever asking for it, and accounted for in ways that reinforce your unseen power. You didn't have to chase recognition or manipulate outcomes. Simply being there, unplanned and unnoticed, transformed you into someone whose presence matters far more than words or effort could convey. Influence, in its purest form, often flows to those who the world never expected to touch it. So, if you've learned anything today, let it sink in. Moments matter more than intention. Silence can be more powerful than ambition. And being the variable no one predicted is how invisible people quietly shape the world around them. If this insight resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into influence, power, and strategy. Like, comment, and share this video so others can discover how subtle actions can create monumental impact. Your presence here matters, and together we can uncover the power hiding in plain sight. Stay awakened, chosen ones.